In Williams County, they called it the craziest idea an old widow could come up with before winter. Late November 1880, when the north wind shifted and the ground had only a few days left before it froze solid, Margaret Collins began building a structure no one believed could last a single night. A dome pieced together from compressed hay bales, stacked by hand, with no wooden frame, no nails, no metal, no heat source inside. Technically, it was completely absurd. Hay absorbs moisture. Hay rots easily. Hay doesn't block wind. In conditions where temperatures could drop below 30 degrees Fahrenheit, even a tiny gap would be enough for a blast of cold air to pierce through and kill calves in minutes. The locals knew this well. They stopped their wagons, looked at the low round structure, and shook their heads. That dome had no insulation, no double walls, no heat-retaining materials, no support from coal, oil, or a stove. It relied solely on a principle no one believed would work. Small volume, still air, slow heat transfer. That was all Margaret was counting on. She pressed the bales into thick, even layers, trying to maintain consistent compression to minimize gaps. She stacked them in shrinking circles, forming a dome to reduce the surface area exposed to wind. She positioned the entrance facing south to avoid the cold blasts from the north-northwest, the direction that killed the most calves in the area. In theory, if the structure stayed airtight, the body heat from the calves could be trapped in the small space, raising the internal temperature 10 to 15 degrees above the outside. But it was just theory. No one in Williams County had ever tried it. They were used to wooden barns, stoves, and piles of straw draped over the cattle's backs. Meanwhile, Margaret stood alone in the yard, arranging each bale as if calculating rather than gambling. Passers-by offered exactly 2 short, dry sentences. As cold as the weather. Hay won't hold through a Dakota winter. And, she's old now. No one asked why she was doing it. No one warned her about the coming cold. No one thought an old widow could understand thermodynamics better than they did. But Margaret didn't explain. She just kept working, checking the compression of each bale, adjusting the dome's slope so snow would slide off without breaking the structure, and sealing every gap because she knew, if wind got in even once, the whole thing would fail completely. She didn't talk about the idea, didn't talk about hope, didn't talk about science. She only knew that the winter of 1880 was coming fast, and that winter wouldn't give anyone a chance to fix mistakes. Early December 1880, Williams County had no radio, no weather maps, no official forecasts. Warnings came from just 3 sources: the mail rider from Minute, the store owner in Williston hearing from passing travelers, and fur traders returning from the north. All 3 said the same thing, short and enough to make listeners stand up straight. The wind has shifted. In Dakota, that wasn't weather description. It was a technical alert. A mass of cold air from Canada was moving down. Wind speeds could exceed 30-40 miles per hour. Temperatures could drop below 25 degrees Fahrenheit in a single night. The physical signs appeared in the familiar sequence. Birds vanished from the sky in under 24 hours, sign of rapidly falling pressure. Wind changed to a rusty iron smell sign of air carrying ice particles. Sky pressed low, thick stratus clouds, flat light sign of temperature about to plummet. Ranches around Williston reacted immediately, reinforcing barn walls with 1.5-inch boards, stuffing straw into every crack, firing coal stoves from midday to maintain a stable 40-45 degrees Fahrenheit. Everything based on one principle: reduce air circulation, slow heat loss, keep calf body temperature at 101-102 degrees Fahrenheit. But amid that frantic preparation, Margaret Collins did the opposite. She didn't change a single thing in her design. She focused on one variable alone: wind. Her hay-bale dome didn't rely on rigid materials, but on the principle: reduce air volume, faster heat buildup from calf bodies, less loss through convection. With a volume of about 8,100 cubic feet, if airtight, 2-3 calves could raise the internal temperature 10-15 degrees Fahrenheit above outside without stove or coal. But a single 0.51-inch gap would increase air exchange 4 or 5 times, enough to suck out all heat and drop the structure's temperature to outdoor levels in minutes. So while everyone hammered nails, added boards, poured coal, Margaret did only one thing: seal every air path. She tapped each bale to gauge compression by vibration, rotated bales so fibers lay horizontal, reducing vertical gaps, tied ropes to evenly tighten layers against 35 miles per hour's wind, checked the entrance to ensure it faced south for minimal wind, ran her hand along base corners to test for leaks. Passers-by saw only a low hay dome, but they didn't see the convection calculations she was solving in her head. They tossed back the usual 2 Dakota-style lines: "Hay won't hold this winter," and "She's 74 now." But hay didn't need to retain heat. It only needed to block wind. If it reduced wind infiltration by 30%, calves could survive a minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit night. At 50%, they could handle 30 degrees Fahrenheit. And if tight enough, their combined biological heat would push past the lethal threshold. Margaret didn't explain that. She just tightened another knot, adjusted another seam, and looked at the sky pressing down like a thick lead sheet. When the wind changed, smell and birds vanished, no one in Williams County doubted. The coming winter wouldn't allow any mistake to be corrected twice. Mid-December 1880, the blizzard hit Williams County without further warning beyond the north wind shifting from whistling to howling, constant day and night like unrelenting pressure. Snow didn't fall straight but flew sideways, shredded into thin strips so sharp that standing outside for seconds made eyes sting. Visibility dropped to nearly zero, facing a wooden house just steps away, its shape blurred into a white smear. No edges, no outline. Air grew heavy and thick, cold enough that each breath felt squeezed midway by an invisible hand. Temperature needed no numbers. Touching a door latch, metal instantly drained skin warmth, painful like a cut. Dry firewood inside cracked and popped, signaling moisture sucked to the lowest level. Wind slammed walls in clear rhythms, like someone endlessly hammering cold air into every wood fiber. Wall vibrations showed wind force stronger than any previous winter night. On neighboring ranches, rumors spread faster than wind. A rider from the east said calves in a sealed barn died stiff in the straw, not from lack of fire but wind through a warped board. A fur trader from the north reported one ranch losing half its calves overnight, not from hunger but cold, piercing walls. Each report short, blunt, enough to jolt listeners. This year's storm wasn't just stronger. It was overwhelming every preparation thought safe. In her small wooden house, Margaret Collins couldn't step outside. The front door was blocked by drifted snow, too thick to crack open. Wind was so strong it pushed cold air through every tiny gap, bringing in dense chill like dry ice vapor. Each time she reached near the door crack, cold slapped instantly, aching to the bones. Checking the hay dome was impossible. Opening the door seconds would topple a 7-4-year-old. She knew one wind gust off balance. Snow could bury her at the threshold. Outside, the land drowned in white, indistinguishable sky from ground. No sound but wind, no cattle, no hooves, no voices. Everything locked by the storm in total control. And in that storm-choked silence, one truth stood clear. Margaret couldn't see, couldn't go out, couldn't check how her dome was holding. All she had now were 4 wooden walls and wind pounding the roof as a reminder that nature, at its harshest peak, allowed no human to step out and challenge it. At over 70, every movement of Margaret Collins carried an unavoidable slowness. Knees ached rising, back hurt bending, hands trembled slightly holding anything long. In those howling storm nights, cold wasn't just in air. It seeped into bones, deeper than any coat or blanket could block. She knew her limits without doctor or anyone telling. This body no longer had strength to rebuild what collapsed. If the hay dome failed, if wind tore it overnight, if calves died, this winter would end all her effort. Not from grief, but no strength to start over. That thought didn't panic her, but it cut like a thin blade, clear, cold, unavoidable. As wind slammed the roof, Margaret recalled past winters, standing with her husband in the old barn. They watched calves shiver in straw, breath rising then swept away, nights awake to faint cries of calves not making it, mornings opening doors to small bodies stiffened in hours of deep cold. She never forgot lifting a calf, unnaturally light as cold drained life, setting it down like lifeless wood. Those memories didn't weaken her. They only confirmed what she knew from the start. Failure this time meant no way forward. Still, Margaret didn't complain. No self-pity. No begging for milder weather. No praying for the dome to hold. Weather didn't change for prayers. And she knew that better than anyone. She wasn't one to fight with hope. She fought with what remained in her old hands. Experience, endurance, and a will that refused surrender before seeing the outcome. In the small house, by the fading oil lamp, she stayed silent, listening to wind hissing through walls like a merciless clock, ticking time left for the structure built with her aching fingers. She could do nothing but wait. No fixing, no reinforcing, no checking. Only one thing clear. Age wouldn't allow redo if everything collapsed. And that truth made the rest of the night heavy as stone, on her chest silent, cold, merciless. Mid-December 1880, a night endless, as if without end, covered Williams County, and in Margaret Collins's small wooden house, everything compressed into a suffocating deadlock. Wind struck walls in strong beats, shaking the frame like someone shaking from outside. Each impact sent cold air through tiny gaps, slashing the room like ice needles. The oil lamp on the table flickered, light shrinking each time wind forced cold air through the door, flaring briefly, only to shrink again with the next gust. Margaret sat on the old wooden chair, not lying in bed, knowing silence between strong winds tricked one into thinking sleep possible, but really just dead pauses before another fierce wave. She couldn't sleep. Didn't try. Closing eyes, she saw the hay dome out there, buried in snow and wind, unable to stop imagining a crack, a gap, a slipped rope. She couldn't check, not from fear, but wind so strong opening the door could wrench her old arms and throw her down the steps. At her age, one fallen blizzard could end it. She understood, accepted she was forced inside 4 wooden walls tonight. Hearing wind blast the house face, snow whip the roof like gravel, each vibration signaling rising pressure hour by hour. Time passed slowly, Margaret feeling each minute like new snow layering the roof. Each breath colder than the last, not from dying fire, but storm forcing cold through every material, wood or cloth. All night sounds compressed. Wind, wood cracking, lamp fluttering, her own breathing. No other noise but nature attacking the land. No cattle calls, no horse whinnies, no voices, everything cut from the living world. And that absence made each minute endless. Margaret sat still, hands on knees to stop trembling, eyes fixed on the lamp's weak light. She didn't think hope or failure, only time uncontrollable, unmeasurable by feeling, yet eroding everything bit by bit. She knew. If the dome held tonight, calves lived. If not, all effort meaningless. But knowing, she could do nothing but sit in the small house, listening as storm deepened into night. That was the waiting that choked breath, waiting without action, choice, escape. Only wind, darkness, and time stretched as if lengthened by the storm engulfing everything. The next morning, with the blizzard not yet over but wind slightly less fierce than the night before, news began arriving. The only way Williams County had in winter, 1,880. Slow, scattered, through riders braving thick snow to relay what they'd seen. The first was a young man from a ranch about 4 miles away, face pale from cold, coat crusted thin ice, voice hoarse from wind in his throat the whole way. He said one short sentence, needing no explanation. All the calves over there are dead, not from hunger, not sickness. Dead right in the straw, in a wooden barn sealed with thick boards, thought safest. Margaret didn't react. She just nodded lightly, as if prepared to hear it. Another rider came at noon, bringing news from an eastern ranch. Double walls, coal stove lit evening before, but wind found a warped board gap. Calves stiff before dawn. The man spoke in undisguised confusion. They thought they'd done everything right, but nature overrode human calculation. Later news came slower as wind strengthened again. But all the same, ranches around Williston losing calves in droves, few survivors, some none left. No need to state why. Last night's wind pierced unseen tiny cracks, sucked heat in minutes, turned sealed barns into deadly cold traps. The irony. All those barns built with good, thick, solid wood, stoves, materials deemed proper. But that created a chilling, unspoken comparison. Sealed wooden barns failure. Everything thought safe collapsed before wind. In that stifling atmosphere, Margaret's hay dome became an unknown. No one knew what was happening inside. No one dared guess. No one believed it had a chance. A low, light structure, no wood, no frame, no heat, theoretically. It should have blown apart in the storm's first hour. But Margaret didn't go check, didn't ask about it. She sat quietly in the wooden house, hands on table, eyelids heavy from no sleep but not trembling in fear. She didn't cry. No complaints. No prayers. Those didn't raise temperature, stop wind, save calves. In the world of Dakota edge dwellers, prayer didn't stand above cold wind, only reality. And reality now one thing, calves in other ranches dying in herds, while her hay structure remained unproven. Each report like new snow layering her chest, slowing breath, but not enough to shake her. Instead of panic, Margaret listened to the stories as facts, no judgment, no reaction, just noting. Last night, wind pierced wood walls, wind extinguished coal, wind sucked heat from large barns in minutes, meaning the deciding factor wasn't material, but airflow, and that only that was what she'd tried to control in her dome. All that day, Margaret didn't cross the threshold. Each strong wind gust against the house walls. She knew if the dome withstood that force, calves lived. If not, all hope lost while she still sat here. But she didn't stand, open door, try to look. She just waited, waited for the storm to end itself, waited for weather to reveal truth, waited for the one moment she could know if her effort went toward life or death. And in that stone-heavy time, her silence wasn't fear, but the calm of one who understood nature was deciding, and she couldn't intervene. The morning after, in December 1880, the wind no longer howled like the night before. It hadn't vanished, just shifted from fierce lashes like whips to long, heavy, steady breaths, as if the blizzard had spent nearly all its strength after a night blanketing all of Williams County. Snow was still falling, but no longer swirling in vortices. It drifted diagonally, softer, showing wind pressure had dropped to a level where a person could stand outside a few minutes without being knocked over. When Margaret Collins opened the wooden door, the hinges creaked dry and sharp, a sound signaling the cold wind had sucked out every last drop of moisture overnight. She stepped out, her shawl covering most of her face, breath instantly turning to white frost before her eyes. Snow drifted on the porch up to her knees, packed hard like soft stone. She had to wedge each step with her foot to advance toward the hay dome, not far from the house. But in these conditions it became a breathless trek. Each step tested whether her legs still had strength. Each gust slapping across reminded her that one stronger blast could throw her off balance on the slick snow. But she kept going. Slow but without hesitation. When she reached it, Margaret stopped. The hay dome was blurred under a thick layer of snow, but it held its shape perfectly, no distortion, no collapse, no part shifted out of place. Snow clung in an even thick layer on the surface, a sign that last night's wind hadn't found any gap to slip through and tear the structure apart. She stood before it a long time, at least a few minutes, maybe more, not from indecision, but because her 4-year-old body needed time to catch her breath after the constant wind in her face. But there was another reason. This was a moment she couldn't redo if it went wrong. She needed a few breaths to face the truth she'd been forced to wait for all night. She reached up, placed her hand on the rope tying the dome's entrance. Fingers trembled, not from fear, but from cold seeping through gloves. She pulled the rope. The door opened easily. A rush of air escaped, not scorching hot like from a coal stove, but soft warmth, characteristic of a sealed space that had retained heat overnight. That warmth hit her face, not strong but distinct, and she knew immediately the structure hadn't failed. Inside the dome, the two calves lay close together on dry straw, breathing steadily, bodies warm, fur free of ice. One stirred slightly as light entered. The other shifted its head toward the lingering warmth in the small space. No signs of hypothermia, no spasms, no violent shivering, and most importantly, none dead. They had survived the night considered the coldest since the first ranchers settled the area, without a stove, without thick wooden walls, without expensive materials, just a tightly compressed hay dome, airtight, with volume small enough for the two calves' bodies to generate just enough heat to counter the outdoor cold. Margaret knelt to check more closely. She placed her hand on one calf's side, its skin warm, not from external heat but natural, steady warmth. That was the clearest proof that all night heat hadn't leaked out. The structure had done exactly what she'd predicted: block cold air convection, keep air still, and harness the calves' own body heat as the sole biological energy source. She checked the base corners where gaps were most likely. No sign of wind infiltration. Checked the ropes still taut. Checked the dome's inner surface. No frost buildup, meaning no cold air blasts had pierced through to freeze moisture. She didn't smile, didn't sigh in relief, didn't say a word. Her only gesture was gently pulling the dome door closed to keep the calves warm a bit longer. In the morning's light wind, with the sun just thinly rising and weak, Margaret stood up, looked at the dome one last time. She needed no further confirmation. The result was clear. While many other ranches lost calves overnight to wind-piercing wooden walls, the hay structure everyone called crazy had preserved life. And on that morning, across the snow-covered field, there was no sound of triumph, no cheers, no dramatic acts, just one simple but weightiest truth. Her design had been right. By noon that day, as rumors spread fast along wagons on Williams County's dirt roads, the people who'd once laughed at the old widow's hay dome idea began appearing in her yard. None knocking, none greeting, just standing a few steps away, wind whipping snow around their legs as if prolonging the awkward silence. They brought no apologies, no explanations. People rarely admitted mistakes when the cold still bit hard into skin, as if winter wanted to humiliate everyone. They just looked at the dome, the thing they'd yesterday called crazy, useless, pointless, now standing intact in the snow. No tilt, no collapse, no exposed gap for wind to rip through. Eyes lingered long on the even snow cover, sign of a structure wind couldn't dislodge, then quietly shifted to an almost bewildered look, a mix of old skepticism, new defeat, and a touch of fear. No one asked Margaret how she'd done it. No one said congratulations. They hadn't come for kind words. They'd come because they'd lost calves, and they needed to know why she hadn't. The men standing there, shoulders still crusted with ice from their own barns, carried the smell of cold straw and sleepless hours. Some eyes red from wind, some from nights dragging dead calves out. At the Johnson Ranch, all 4 lost. At Whitaker's, 3 dead against the wooden barn wall despite coal stove burning all night. At Monroe's, wooden floor iced over, 2 calves fell and never got up. They carried that pain to Margaret's yard, and the contrast between their losses and her calves' survival made the space between them heavy, thick, harder to breathe than the north wind. They didn't need to ask. They just saw the obvious numbers. Their calves dead, hers alive. That gap was the answer they weren't ready to touch. One stepped closer, bent to see the snow packed around the dome's base. He lightly touched the exposed hay surface under fresh snow, as if testing whether the stupid dome from before was real, whether it was the same hay they fed livestock daily. When he pulled his hand back, no one asked, "How does it work?" Or, "How did you calculate?" Everyone knew that would force them to admit they'd been wrong. And being wrong in a Dakota winter wasn't minor. It cost lives. Margaret stood a few steps away, hands still sticky with lamp oil from the night before. She said nothing. No explanations. No boasting. Her face showed no pride or vengeance. Just the quiet of someone who'd known this would happen, not because she was smarter, but because she'd had no other choice. The men looked at her, then back at the dome. Some pursed lips. Some drew deep breaths. One turned away quickly, as if hiding something cracking inside. Maybe pride, maybe memory of words they'd said days ago. She's too old to understand physics. No one apologized, and she didn't need it. In Dakota 1880, apologies didn't save dead calves. Apologies didn't redo a freezing night. Apologies didn't warm failed wooden barn walls. They just stood there, in wind and snow, looking at an old widow's small dome and the calves still alive, and that life became the cold, silent retort heavier than any words they'd ever spoken. Then one by one they turned and left. No goodbyes, no promises to return, but their steps heavy as if dragging the truth they didn't want to face. Perhaps, in the harshest winter of 1880, it was they, not the old widow, who hadn't understood physics. In the 2 days after, as news spread across Williams County that the old widow's hay dome had kept 2 calves alive through the coldest night of winter, 1880, people began copying not because they fully believed, but because they'd run out of options. Temperatures stayed low, north winds shifted hourly, and their wooden barns had proven failure with stiff dead calves against walls. No time left to argue, only time to build. And they built in desperation. The nearest ranches started gathering hay that afternoon, some stacked just as they'd seen from afar. 3 thick bale layers, compressed tight, tied with rough cloth ropes to seal. Low entrance to reduce heat loss. Exactly the principle Margaret had used: no convection, no wind infiltration, small volume for fast heat retention. Results came quick. Next morning, their calves inside, still alive, breathing steady, bodies warm, straw dry. They didn't call it a miracle, just noted a physical fact. When air stays still in a sealed space, calf body heat suffices to beat Dakota night cold. But not everyone succeeded. Some built too hastily walls, 1 bale thick, gaps in joints, poor compression. Some made domes too tall, internal volume too large, calves unable to generate enough heat. Some made entrances too wide, wind blowing through constantly, pulling heat out in minutes. One ranch west of Williston threw up a dome in an hour, thin ropes, uneven hay stacking. That night, both their calves died not because the idea was wrong, but execution was. And those deaths spread as a real warning. No magic. Physics doesn't accept sloppiness. At the Monroe farm, they tried a dome but chose a spot exposed to strong wind. No natural barrier. Wind tunneled from the bottom, constant cold flow, opening the door next morning. 1 calf alive, 1 dead before dawn. Mrs. Monroe stood before her warped dome, not blaming the idea, just the rush. "I should have done it exactly like hers," she said, eyes fixed on the ground. At the Johnson Ranch, their 6-year-old son heard about Margaret's structure and rebuilt one in 3 hours, tightening ropes layer by layer, compressing each bale, testing wind with his own body. Their calves lived. They made no grand claims. Just said, "Do it right, it works. Do it wrong, they die." The whole area began shifting. Small domes sprouted, scattered in the snow like strange mounds, each carrying a different story of hope, technique, and fear. No more mocking, no more calling Margaret crazy. They now understood survival didn't lie in community opinion, but in a structure's airtightness, a bale's compression, and the precision of hands building it. No miracle saved the calves. No blind faith shielded them from cold nights. Just physics. Just technique. Just doing it right or wrong. Right live, wrong die. That was Williams County's first lesson in the winter of 1880. When cold runs deep enough, everyone becomes a student of an old widow. The following winter, when snow first touched Williams County ground and the north wind shifted to that dry, sharp tone signaling cold deeper than the year before, people didn't wait to see who would build the first hay dome. They just did it. No debate. No retesting. No questions that 1880 had answered at too high a cost. Small domes rose on snow-covered fields as if they'd always belonged to this landscape, round, low, airtight, rope secure, stacked by the exact principle Margaret had created almost instinctively. Small volume, 3 hay layers, low door, no gaps for wind. No one called it crazy anymore. No one recalled old jokes. In a land where one night could wipe out a ranch's calves, the only way to survive wasn't pride, but reality. And reality said the hay dome worked. Even ranches long used to traditional wooden barns no longer saw this design as opposing ancestral wisdom. They saw it as a tool like a plow, a shovel, something to use when winter unleashed full force on northern Dakota. Even those who'd reluctantly copied the year before now built domes earlier, more carefully, no longer letting ego interfere. When someone built wrong, Neighbors came over to show how to compress hay tighter, tie ropes so wind couldn't lift the dome. No one wanted to repeat 1,880's lost numbers. Margaret Collins's name also shifted in the region's stories. People no longer said, eccentric old widow. They said, Mrs. Collins, the first to build the dome. Not worship, just simple acknowledgement that an idea once mocked had become the community's survival standard. When the peak winter of 1,881 hit, nearly every ranch had at least one dome ready, lying low and silent like trenches against the cold, and in Williams County, no one mentioned it looking ridiculous. No one mocked its odd shape. No one called it an old woman's way. People just said three words: flat, practical, emotionless. It saves them, from joke to standard, from outlier to common knowledge. In northern Dakota winters, that was the only path to survival. Margaret Collins died a few years after the winter of 1,880. Quietly, as she'd lived her whole life on the edge of Williams County. No big funeral, no entry in state agriculture books, no plaque with her name in the town hall. Northern Dakota communities then weren't used to honoring solitary old folks, let alone knowing how to praise an idea they'd called crazy while she lived. But winter remembered. Winter always remembers. And the ranchers, no matter how taciturn, remembered too. Her first hay dome, once the calves grew, was dismantled for feed. No physical trace left on the snowy field. But that structure passed mouth to mouth from ranch to ranch, father to son, survivor of blizzards to those who'd never known cold's full cruelty. She left no written formula, no drawings, no instructions, just one way of thinking. If wind kills, block wind. If heat escapes, trap heat. If winter allows no trial and error, get it right the first time. People say that whenever someone in the area builds a dome for calves the next winter, they pause, look toward Margaret's old farm, and nod slightly, not in tribute, but acknowledging what everyone understands but few say aloud. Some people don't need loud voices, don't need crowds to lecture, but they understand winter better than anyone. They don't argue, don't boast being right. They just do. And what they do is right enough to save lives. Margaret's legacy wasn't fame, wasn't history books. Her legacy was the winters after, when hundreds of calves survived in hay domes scattered across Williams County. Her legacy was a new view of survival, simple, humble, precise, needing no recognition. The north wind often erases footprints in snow within hours. But some traces, even Dakota wind, can't erase traces in how people relearned to fight winter, starting from an old widow the whole area once laughed at. And long after, whenever a calf survives its first cold night, Margaret's legacy is recalled not in words, but in life.